All right, so here's the breakdown. Lucia di Lammermoor is essentially a Scottish Romeo and Juliet love story based on Sir Walter Scott's 1819 novel, The Bride of Lammermoor, allegedly based on a real incident. We've got Lucia, who falls in love with Edgardo, son of her father's family rival, and he falls in love with her as well. Lucia's evil brother Enrico forbids their love and forces her to marry Arturo. That's the major plot. However, for those of you who find Romeo and Juliet a little bit subdued, Lucia di Lammermoor is sprinkled with more drama. In this case, a ghost, fake news, insanity, and, spoiler alert, a wedding night bridegroom murder. Lucia di Lammermoor is one of the greatest bel canto masterpieces. From Lucia's madness, the operatic gold standard for going insane, the mad scene is born. In this mad, mad world of ours, you don't want to miss this triumph.
Hi, I'm Garnett Bruce. I'm Artistic Advisor at Opera San Antonio, and I'm here to welcome you to the Tobin Center for the Performing Arts in downtown San Antonio. And you just saw Lauren Meeker's quick synopsis of the main struggles of Lucia di Lammermoor, our Romeo and Juliet in the Highlands. But I wanted to give you a little more background on Donizetti's opera. It premiered in Naples in 1835, and this was the center of bel canto music. Bellini had been there, and Donizetti was the heir apparent, and this would also be where Verdi would learn his craft. The theater is the Teatro di San Carlo, and there are numerous music conservatories, and we have a libretto by Salvatore Camerano, and it's an Italian adaptation of a translation of the famous English novel, well, Scottish, Sir Walter Scott wrote in 1819, The Bride of Lammermoor. And he was building off a legend that seems to have actually happened, where a woman was forced into a marriage and killed her husband on the wedding night, or at least attacked him. And they say he survived and never wanted to mention it again. Lucia, however, did not survive her madness. And as we listen to this opera, this bel canto masterpiece, some of the questions that come up is, what makes a person crazy? You know, is it the stress? Is it a betrayal? Is it finding yourself without options? Is it being disrespected? Or is it society's definition that you are not fitting into their prescribed role? And it's probably all of these for Lucia. And each one of those would push somebody off a cliff. Well, she has all of them to contend with in this story. And we meet her as she is having a nightly assignation with Edgardo of Ravenswood. And they have fallen in love, even though the Ravenswoods are the sworn enemies of the Ashtons, who are the current folks in charge of the Lammermoor Castle. Enrico and Lucia's parents have both died, and her mother recently. So in many places you'll see a reference to her grief, not from her stress, but just from the loss of her mother. But let's go back a little to the Walter Scott novel and to life in Scotland. Set in the 15th century, we have bumped it up to the end of the 17th century. So you'll notice our costumes have a restoration feel to them. Sir Walter Scott, writing in the beginning of the 19th century, wrote extensively on Dryden and Swift, and he needed money to pay for his publishing house. And so he was picking up on this trend in Scotland where people were looking at the modern era of 1815, 1819, regretting losing their independence. And he wrote Ivanhoe, which would also be about Scottish heroes. So the plot basics in the Lammermoor regions: the Ashtons are broke, and the Bucklaws are rich, and the Ravenswoods are the enemy. So if Lucia Ashton can marry Arturo Bucklaw, then everything gets better. The music of the piece is from the bel canto area, and this is where bel canto, beautiful singing, where the singers take over. And this is building on a classical style, but allowing the singer free range with cadenzas to express ornaments and emotions. And this is all part of the big romantic era that was sweeping Europe. So here we'll hear a bit of Joan Sutherland and Alfredo Kraus and this secret assignation in the woods near Lammermoor. So welcome back. The loving couple will exchange rings and vows. And at this time in Scotland, your word was your bond. And so they feel that they are legally married to one another. But brother Enrico has a different idea. So Edgardo has gone to France and promised that he would write. And Normanno, who works for Enrico, has intercepted all the letters. And he's created a forged letter from Edgardo to Lucia, breaking up with her, saying he's fallen in love with another woman. And Enrico presents this to his sister on the day that Arturo and all of the Bucklaws have gathered at Lammermoor Castle for the wedding. And this duet, this power struggle between the two siblings, is a hallmark because Lucia stands up for herself. She takes the risk. She wants to determine her own happiness. And as a female character in the early 19th century, this was crazy. And many would deem her such, that she would not follow either her brother's wishes or the societal norms. And her brother will go on and threaten her and say that if she doesn't marry Arturo, then it's likely that the family will fall into decline and that his head will be on the block and he will haunt her for the rest of her days because his political fortunes have fallen apart. William did not succeed and Mary will be put on the throne, he says. And if they are not aligned with the Bucklaws, then they risk certain death and ruin. So Lucia now has just learned that her beloved has forsaken her, and now her brother is forcing her into this marriage, and she has nowhere left to turn. And we then move to the Great Hall at Lammermoor Castle. But before we do that, I want you to hear this music between brother and sister, where they sing the same lines, but with very, very different intentions. This is a modern dress production from Paris with Prete Yende and Arturo Ruzinski. As you might have seen in that Paris production staged by André Serban, the wedding dress is looming there in the background, sort of Lucia's fate or prison garb awaiting her. And at the grand marriage ceremony, there's a signing of the contract. Arturo arrives and doesn't even speak to the bride, just with Enrico. This is a business transaction. This is commerce. This is not love. And no sooner has Lucia signed her name, and as she says, her death warrant, than Edgardo bursts in and demands that he be allowed to marry Lucia, but he is too late. And this is one of the great sextets in all of 19th century opera, where we have Edgardo and Enrico, sworn enemies, begin, and then Lucia and her lady-in-waiting, Elisa, along with the priest Raimondo, and the bridegroom, Arturo. And as this sextet opens up and unfolds, all of their different struggles could go one direction or the other. And I think that's what makes the drama so compelling, that it's a moment that's stopped in time for everyone to have their expressions. So here again are Joan Sutherland and Alfredo Kraus. We are doing a shortened version of Lucia so that we can keep the running time under 90 minutes. So, hence, no chorus, no supers, no vast scene changes. And our orchestra is behind the singers for reasons of safety. This also means that we have a chance to transpose some of the scenes of the opera. And following the sextet, Edgardo leaves and curses Lucia. And then we go directly to his aria in the graveyard. He's surrounded by the tombs of his ancestors, realizing he is the last of the line of the Ravenswoods, and that he has been forsaken, and he's bitter as he imagines Lucia with her new husband up in the castle celebrating. Little does he know that the celebration involves a knife, and that Lucia has taken the knife and killed her husband in the bridal chamber while the celebrations continued downstairs. And we will finish our presentation with the famous mad scene from Lucia di Lammermoor, sung by Brenda Ray. And to take us into what makes a person mad, Donizetti uses all of the colors of the orchestra and, in many ways, the silences to create tension, because we don't know what she's going to do next. And her memory is playing tricks with her. So Raimondo comes in and explains to everyone what has just happened, and there's this rousing hymn praying for the Bucklaws. And then we see that Lucia is unhinged, and no one seems to be able to reach her. Now, we understand madness in the 21st century, thanks to Sigmund Freud and others, and an interpretation of dreams. But at the beginning of the 19th century, you had many different theories, and many of them were attributed to just being female. Voltaire said, what is madness? It is erroneous perceptions and a reasonable conclusion being drawn from them. So, and Lucia believes that Edgardo didn't love her anymore, believed that the family fortunes were falling apart, is indeed mourning the loss of her mother and her parents, and is feeling society's pressure. So she's having reactions to these and has snapped and taken matters into her own hands. So she comes in and she hears a voice. Now, way back at the beginning, her first aria says that she had seen the ghost near this fountain on their property of some other young woman who was murdered by her boyfriend. And so there's a sense of a haunting that is expressed in the flute. And she calls it a sweet voice that's leading her to her happy memories. And then her blood runs cold, gelo, ice, as she imagines the phantasma coming towards her, and perhaps coming towards everyone in that room, being a superstitious society. And then she explains to everyone about the ghost at the fountain and the legend of the Lammermoors, and she wasn't going to end up that way, and that she saw Arturo as an oppressive enemy. And then she remembers or imagines what her wedding might be like. And you hear this beautiful love theme that we had in the first scene. And it becomes colder and more distant and melancholy in some ways, as it becomes this hymn of longing. And this is what sort of takes her to her first collapse, upon which Enrico arrives on the scene and is shocked and horrified, but also keenly aware that he has betrayed his own sister and that he has been the villain in this moment because he was so obsessed with his needs, he neglected hers. And in front of everyone, Lucia calls him out. And so the guilt is on his hands, and you might say the blood is on both his hands and her hands at this moment. But she works herself into a frenzy and collapses and dies. And unfortunately, this is the fate of many 19th century heroines, that we are not allowing the strong female character to live. And it would continue through the 19th century, famously Gilda or Carmen or Cho-Cho-san. Any of these strong-willed women were not allowed to continue. And when this opera was done at English National Opera about 10 years ago, there was a great program note by Christopher Cook. And he said that maybe society was boxing in women, but at the opera, the women would hold the stage. We are now past the era of the castrati, and if anyone wanted to hear all of the high notes, it would be the great sopranos of the era. And so these were who the bel canto composers were writing for. And Donizetti is really reaching to the pinnacle of his expertise and taking advantage of the great talent in Naples and creating this 26-minute mad scene that is a tour de force of vocalization, of acting, but it allows a woman and a woman's point of view to hold the stage and to, in our case, to be the crowning moment. Here is an excerpt of Lucia's mad scene with Beverly Sills. I only have an audio track, but I think you can imagine the rest. I hope you heard how the flute balances and echoes, and sometimes leads Beverly Sills in her madness. And as we conclude, as I've been working on this and working on the opera, when I would type Lucia di Lammermoor into my iPhone, Siri would self-correct. And her correction was Lucia di Lammermoor. And it's not far off the mark. And as we think about a 19th century opera in a 21st century place, we now applaud the strength of these characters, and that Lucia was willful enough to look for her own happiness, and it just got thwarted by really a victim of circumstance. So I hope this has given you a little more of a handle on Lucia di Lammermoor, and I want to thank you for joining Opera San Antonio as we come back from the pandemic with our reduced version of this opera, but sung live in the Tobin Center in front of a small audience, and it will be live streamed at the Saturday performance and then available for the month of May at our website, operasa.org, where you can also find links to other articles and our other online offerings, in addition to announcements about next season. I'd really like to thank our sponsor for Lucia Live, which is HEB, who are helping now, as well as the San Antonio Symphony, who has provided us the platform in which to make these films. And they are our collaborators here at the Tobin Center, along with our maestro music director, Francesco Miliotto, and our general and artistic director, E. Lauren Meeker. Thanks so much. I'm Garnett Bruce, artistic advisor.